One of my great pleasures is an early morning run through downtown Frederick, Maryland, so we can talk about the place we actually are. It is an especially well-preserved pre-World War II urban landscape, a landscape to which I'm partial, I suppose, since I grew up in one on the northwest side of my native home and land called Chicago. I run along the marvelous 1920s urban oasis called Baker Park, with its white-pillared, tidy schoolhouse perched above the creek, and I run past the WPA-built stone fountain and skating house, and I run up Market Street, filled with blocks of small shops and restaurants, looking probably better than it did 40 years ago. With the exception of a Starbucks, of course, and a Ben & Jerry's, almost everything downtown is local. And almost everything is expensive, and truth be told, I don't shop down there a lot. Like many older towns, the successful revival of downtown Frederick has not been built upon a return of hardware stores, grocery stores, and greasy spoons. Mostly, it is upscale restaurants, specialty boutiques with a smattering of artist galleries and antique stores. The entire city of Frederick now has no hardware store, but its 65,000 people now have 2 Lowe's and 2 Home Depots. Supporting local economies is often understood as a sine qua non part of globalist place-based thinking, but are these kinds of local economies built on luxury consumption? Are they built on encouraging superfluous spending by the wealthy? This paper tries to revive and reinterpret the classic critique of luxury in order to make sense of this situation. I want to review briefly the traditional critique of luxury, say a bit about why it disappeared, and then offer some discussion of where that critique might land today. I want to argue that we need to reimagine the critique of luxury, but recognize that it may better be applied in the spirit of the concerns of the ancients to the commercial life among big box stores and discount centers. Now, the traditional critique of luxury we can see exemplified in Plato's Republic, where Socrates consistently identifies the desire for luxury as a root cause of disharmony in the city. Socrates maintains 3 grounds for this critique. 1, luxury promotes disharmony in the individual, which harms fitness and health. 2, luxury promotes disharmony among citizens, since it results in competition over scarce resources. And 3, luxury ultimately promotes warfare, since more and more resources are needed to sustain the quote-unquote quality of life expected by the luxurious city. In each case, resources are diverted from uses that would be more beneficial for the city. Now, we should be clear that Socrates' vision of the non-luxury city is not Spartan. Poverty, he says, leads to meanness and incompetence. His citizens have bread, wine, clothes, shoes, and houses, he says. They have desserts of figs, chickpeas, and beans. Not my dessert, but, which they partake in while wearing garlands and singing hymns to the gods and enjoying one another's real company, all the while drinking in moderation, Socrates says. So luxury does not critique the material world in total. It critiques excessive attachment and use. After many, many centuries of consensus on this question of luxury, 18th century England saw its breakdown. Bernard Mandeville's Private Vices, Public Benefits fable of the bees shocked and provoked, but it paved the way for the more thorough work of David Hume. Hume argues strenuously that this classical critique of luxury is exactly backwards. Plato equates luxury with indolence, but Hume says the arrival of luxury, especially through trade, quote, arouses men from their indolence, and presenting the gayer and more opulent part of the nation with objects of luxury which they never before dreamed of, raises in them a desire for a more splendid way of life than what their ancestors enjoyed. Even further, Hume maintains not only this benefit, but even moral elevation, for he says these pursuits of luxury lead to, quote, an increase in humanity from the very habit of conversing together and contributing to each other's pleasure and entertainment. Luxury for Hume is not state-destroying. It is the mark of the truly civilized state. So which is it, Hume or Plato? You can probably guess the answer, given the conference that we're at. But I don't want to make it too easy. Since most of us here enjoy the benefits of indoor plumbing, central heating, refrigeration, a chariot at our beck and call, these things appear to be luxuries. After all, the problem for localists, economists will tell us, is that the basic goods of life can now be delivered through extremely sophisticated and efficient systems by low-skilled labor, assisted by ingenious machines that make available a wide variety of basic merchandise at the lowest possible cost. Especially with the advent of computer inventory systems, an immense network can be managed with efficiency in order to deliver your cheap soap and cheap socks, and cheap flat-screen TVs, and cheap faux designer fashion lines, and cheap throw rugs for every season, and so on. The difficulties with this system are not that it can't deliver lots of goods cheap. It can. The problem is, I contend, that the system destroys persons. The point of the rest of this paper, hopefully, is to name this properly by reviving the classical language of luxury in today's situation. For Wendell Berry, a disordered economy is ultimately the outgrowth of disordered, undisciplined persons. As he says in one essay, there are not enough rich and powerful people to consume the whole world. These persons do not know how to provide for themselves. They've multiplied useless needs, they recognize no limits, and ultimately are gripped by a wasteful, unrestrained consumptiveness. He says this is the fault of an economy that is wasteful from top to bottom, a symbiosis of an unlimited greed at the top and lazy, passive, and self-indulgent consumptiveness at the bottom. It's obviously that lazy, passive, self-indulgent consumptiveness at the bottom, us, right? Not the Walton family, that this critique of luxury is aimed at. In this economy, the person does not know when to stop. The person cannot name what is too much. Indeed, there is no when to stop. And this, it seems to me, is luxury. At its root, the classical critique of luxury is not about expensive goods. This is often where we go. It is not about expensive goods. Rather, the critique is of the idea that developing and satisfying complex desires for material goods is part of what it means to live a good life for humans, rather than a hindrance of it. The critique of luxury assumes that these complex desires that we constantly elaborate and are constantly satisfied by the latest product at Home Depot actually get in the way of us being able to grasp what a good life is. This is at the root of the critique, I want to argue. This availability of goods distorts the self. The self begins to believe that developing and satisfying these complex desires is a crucial part of the good life rather than a hindrance to it. Now, Charles Taylor has an important piece of language here. Taylor suggests that moral agency consists of us having terms of what he calls strong evaluation. He suggests in the absence of these words, we become simple weighers, which means we become utilitarians. That is, we assume that if we can get the socks, and we can get more socks at Walmart for cheaper, that we should do it. It would be crazy not to do it. And it's only terms of strong evaluation that enable us to have a thicker moral sense of the world. It seems to me that the cheaper socks and the unlimited socks at Walmart need to be characterized in terms of luxury. That is, their excessive use, and we should recognize that the selves involved in this are involved in vice. I suggest that we see luxury in three other ways, therefore, besides expense. And I'll condense these down so that we stay within the time period. The first way is to recognize that our system simply produces too many goods and too many choices. My mother works at a homeless shelter, and she just restarted a morning shift when Trader Joe's delivers their goods. And she said to me on the phone, I forgot how big the delivery is from Trader Joe's. You'd think they were going out of business. Trader Joe's is kind of the nadir of cheap food because it tries to pretend that it's not cheap food. As is well documented, the system, the economic system, simply overproduces goods, and therefore there is a lot of waste. Barry Schwartz, among others, has pointed out that one way to deal with this prodigious production is to simply multiply choices beyond measure, like 85 different varieties and brands of crackers that he counted, and 285 varieties of cookies. I joke to my students about the breakfast cereal aisle or the toothpaste aisle. This kind of unlimited, instant availability of seemingly infinite choices is certainly what ancient authors saw when they critiqued luxury. There was no good enough. There was no sense of where to stop. Rather, inhabiting this space means becoming an agent for whom the constant process of elaborating and gratifying material desires is the good life. Schwartz contends that this harms what is truly the good life by enmeshing us in choices that are at least unimportant and at worst are time-consuming and frustrating to us. Secondly, because these goods are so cheap, we become careless with them. If you don't like what you bought, well, just throw it away and buy something else. Which brings me to my second point. Such availability promotes carelessness in use, which is a hallmark of the life of luxury. The ancient images of luxurious feasts with wasted food and broken plates, well, now we can have them all the time, right here at the Mount. Since we can get pounds and pounds of ground beef for $1.99 pounds and buy new dishes whenever we want. This kind of carelessness with material goods means that we no longer hire people to fix things. And it seems to me that this carelessness is what the ancients meant by luxury. It's just much more widely available to us. Thirdly, like the rich of old, these habits depend on a rather large coterie of servants. Vegetables at our co-op, which come from a growers co-op of small farms up in Pennsylvania called Tuscarora Growers, cost more because, as the manager said to our regional food co-op meeting, the co-op guarantees to its farmers a sustainable living and a high-quality product to us. So there are fair prices for quality goods, but they are certainly higher than at your local Walmart. However, these fair prices support good land practices, and most importantly, the small family farms that we have heard lauded in many of our conversations today. However, from exploited immigrant labor to sweatshops to bad farms to retail workers forced to do overtime off the clock, the luxury self, the big box self, saves 50 cents on a bar of soap or a head of lettuce, only to squander it on a vending machine Coke or a $4 coffee drink Starbucks. The single most watched number at Walmart is the store labor costs as a percentage of sales. A number that I read they drive down further than anyone else in America to an astonishing 10% of store sales. As a board member of a relatively large food co-op, I can only wish that our labor was 10% of our sales. It is just an impossible number for any small business to meet. But of course, we know how Walmart is able to meet this. Except for Costco, we can talk about that in questions. Every other mass market retailer pays such low wages that their full-time employees receive various kinds of state supplemented benefits that make it possible for these folks to live. Food stamps, housing subsidies, and most importantly, the earned income tax credit, which supplements their wages to a level that makes it possible for them to live. In contrast, I would argue a more reasonable system would not seek the maximal amount of goods at minimal costs, but instead seek better selves. It would not encourage a great amount of choice. Indeed, it might privilege knowledgeable retailers who sought to select their goods well and provide knowledge to their customers so that I didn't have to choose. One would make do with what was reasonably available because these goods would be more expensive. We would be more careful with the goods and perhaps more interested in knowing how to repair them. Finally, such a system could support reasonable wages, more skilled labor, for at a smaller level, retailers will be more interested in laborers, store workers who are versatile and who can learn the business and thus be paid more. And as importantly, the system would support more humane relationships. The relationships would simply be better than the anonymous servants that now service our economy. A mutual respect would be possible. Such a system would be attractive to some agents. I contend agents who had learned to resist the siren songs of luxury, infinite choice, carefree convenience with their goods, and cheap disposable labor. I will point out in closing that if we follow Socrates, we will properly understand that while such an economy does require change and sacrifice, it need not be Spartan. Stories abound of creative energy animating various local economy projects, as Mark talked about earlier. And from a Christian perspective, such initiatives should be understood as adding what Pope Benedict calls quotas of gratuitousness to economic exchanges themselves. The richness might very well be found in the goods, but they are even more found in the human relationships forged through and around the goods. As Bill Kavanaugh has written, our present consumer economy is actually based on an almost Gnostic detachment from things, since goods are so radically ephemeral and not context-bound. A local economy promotes proper enjoyment of goods, even the basic goods of food and hardware, in a kind of sacramental context, where they end up meaning more, even though we have less of them. So hopefully my food co-op, to which I'm off this afternoon, for our annual meeting where we're giving all of our profits back to our owners, how exciting, is not a luxury, even though it's slightly more expensive, because it manages to get its goods in a different way. I have fewer choices than at Wegmans, our great competitor who has just come to town, but hopefully I have better human relationships because of it. Thank you.